Hello, and welcome to NAEA's 14th Town Hall, focusing on community vibrancy. It's our 75th anniversary edition, a long conversation with some very special guests whom you will all meet shortly. In order to honor our 75th anniversary in 2022, we're taking a look back and a look ahead with some very special voices from across the association across that time. I'm Mario Rosero. I have the great privilege and honor of being the executive director of NAEA. And I always like to say I got my start in the elementary and middle school visual arts classroom in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, where I'm from, and also taught in Chicago public schools. And also spent a lot of time in central office administration in Chicago and in Pittsburgh. So really happy to join you and respect and appreciate all the hard work every day on behalf of our learners in the arts. Before we get started, I always want to take a moment to acknowledge the native lands, the native people that I'm joining you from. I live in Washington, D.C., which is home of the Piscataway, and we really urge everyone to get familiar with that for your region location across the country. I also like to take a moment just to send some good energy and appreciation for everyone for persevering over the last 2 years of this very unique time. And I'm very appreciative of this community and how folks really come together to support one another. So thank you for that. Please know you can utilize closed captioning under live transcript for this. And then once we start into the conversation, you can go to speaker view is usually the best way to view this. So if you've not joined a town hall before, you may be wondering why we do these. We thought, as a national organization serving our members, we didn't want to only support through PDFs. We needed to have real live conversations with people and meet them where they are. So we know, especially the last couple of years, there's a range of things that are on our minds, and the town hall conversation is a way for us to really do a temperature check, but also hopefully provide some inspiration and strategy for you. Folks that are planning to attend, they submit questions in advance, and then those questions become the thread of conversation across all of our guests this evening. I will tell you a little bit about the format for the conversation. I'm going to describe it, and I promise it'll all make sense either when I say it or whenever you see it actually play out. But we do this thing called a long conversation, which is essentially a conversational relay between pairs of folks. So we have person A come on as the interviewer, person B is the interviewee. They have 6 minutes on the clock to have a discussion. At minute 5, if they need it, a chime will ring. They wrap up the conversation. Person A exit. Person B becomes the interviewer. Person C comes on as the interviewee, and so on and so forth. Hopefully that made sense. If not, you're going to see it happen, and it's all magic. If you have Q&A or comments or questions for any of our guests, feel free to keep the chat lively and active. And when we can, in between conversations, we'll make sure that we address those questions and share any resources we might have. And we typically don't have time at the end, but if we do, we'll address any other questions that we didn't get to at that time. I think that's all my housekeeping. So I'm really excited to welcome our first guest. Dr. Sarah Tambucci is a great colleague and friend of mine, but also former president of NAEA. She is an art educator. She's been a principal, an administrator, wearing many different hats, and is the former executive director of the Arts Education Collaborative in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. Sarah, welcome to the conversation.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me to be a part of this conversation.
Good to see you. So we're just going to jump right into our member questions. And the first one is from Bonnie in Colorado. And Bonnie asks, how do you build community related to the arts in a place where the arts are not valued as much?
I think that from my experience, that's an age-old question. I think the start of that kind of conversation is to begin to think about mi casa, su casa. What is going on in their house that is important to them? And how do you meld those agendas together? That's always been successful for me. I think if you are talking with an administrator, talking with a teacher, member of the community, if you can find common ground, that's a good place to begin.
Absolutely. I know this comes up a lot for folks. So
Right.
really appreciate that insight. Carol from Montana is curious about success stories of tiny, isolated town community within larger communities. So her tiny community is 140 miles from anything else. So what are some success stories from some of these more isolated, smaller communities?
Well, I can tell you that while I've done a lot of my work in Pittsburgh, the surrounding suburbs as well, there are many, many rural areas that we have, particularly when I was with the Arts Education Collaborative, some of the schools that I would go to did not have cell service. We had landlines. When I arrived at the school, I had to call back to the office to let them know where I was. So I understand the limitations and the challenges that are involved in rural areas. I think that being able to start small, don't have high expectations, be satisfied with small things that happen, but also take the time to celebrate them. I think that's the thing that we forget about doing. We're so worried about making large gains that we don't take the time and we don't acknowledge for ourselves or our colleagues when something is going well, when something has been done right. That's my perspective.
I love that. I don't think I shared this story with you before, but right at that end of the school year in the first year of the pandemic in 2020, my high school art teacher reached out. And I mentioned this because I went to a very, very, very rural, tiny school district in Western Pennsylvania, Fort Cherry. And he asked for some support because he was retiring and wanted to make sure the program continued. And what was fascinating to me was the longevity of some of these smaller communities, of some of the key players that have invested in education and arts education. So as I begin to write to the board, who's the president of the board? My second grade teacher. So it was really easy for me to connect and make that case. It wasn't easy to win that case, but eventually they did continue the program, which I'm so thrilled about. But I think one of the other ways to reach some of those more isolated communities, from what I find, is that a lot of the players, a lot of the educators, a lot of the community members are there for a very long time and they're really committed. So it's like, how do you build that narrative over time, right? Because that investment really matters in those communities.
The one thing we have to remember is when you do make headway in those communities, it is lasting.
Yeah.
It is not transitional.
Yep.
It takes time to build that kind of feeling of community. But if once you have it, you've got it.
Yeah. So big picture question here. So when you were president of NAEA, what strategies did you employ to take care of the NAEA community? And are there any lessons from that that we might take forward?
I think there are two areas that I'd like to just refer to this evening. One is the area of leadership. It became very apparent as I moved into the presidency, and we've got a wonderful structure at NAEA, the past president, the future president, and the current president, all sitting there for 2 years each. It's like a lifetime commitment when you go into that office. But the transition is really crucial to, I think, NAEA moving forward. Leadership has always been an interest of mine, and I think that when I was president of NAEA, we started the Leadership Academy. We traveled all over the country trying to support state organizations in their development of leaders at the individual, local, the regional, the state organizations. The other area was research. I think that at that time, we didn't know what we didn't know. And it was really important for us to get our heads together to start to begin to think about what do we need to learn most about our community, about our geography, about our dynamics, and in order to support our position that arts education is important for all students. So developing a research agenda was, I think, a top priority while I was president.
Absolutely. So at this time, This time goes so fast, and we're already at the last question for our conversation, which is, can you share with us what your tips for self-care are at this time?
I'm going to excuse me. I will tell you that one of the things I have learned over time is it is crucial to pay attention and have balance in all things. It's important for me to spend time spiritually. I pray, meditate a lot. Physical activity is really important right now. I've just retired from full-time. I'm doing some consulting, but being able to physically remain healthy is important. Intellectually, I still write, I read, and it's important for those brain cells to keep functioning, right? And I think that if you keep the idea of balance in mind, I think that's a good way to not also get stuck in your own self, to reach out to others and do things with and for others. Otherwise, you become very closed. I become very closed. So balance is important.
I love that. Well, thank you for spending time with me, and I'm going to take my leave and pass the baton on to you.
Okay. And I'm going to be talking with Jonathan. Jonathan, excuse me, welcome to this conversation. And I'm going to jump into the questions that we have. First one is from Emily from New York, or excuse me, from North Carolina. How do you create community among adults who are working in art education, who are feeling alone and jaded by the community? How do you do that?
Well, I mean, I personally am working with different groups of art educators so that they don't feel alone. In our state, in the state of Ohio, we have a group of first-year art teachers that meet once a month. And during that time, they get to share out about their experiences, the joys, the things that are going well, their challenges. And then we're able to share resources back and forth. And I think that's the important part is they might feel alone being the only art educator in their building or sometimes in their district, but they're not. It's about forming these connections. I know a lot of people go to social media and are looking to build community amongst those in social media. If you see someone who's doing something amazing and you feel excited about it, reach out to them, start a conversation, send them a message. It's a great way to not feel like you're on this little island, but that you're a part of this vast art education community. It's about being empowered to do those things.
Like your focus at the local level. You're not alone if you're not alone.
And be a part of your state association as well. Being a part of NAEA is wonderful, but also be a part of your state association and get involved. Then you're not just, John in Columbus, Ohio, but I'm a part of art educators, a part of this group that learn and grow together within the state of Ohio.
We're going to jump to a question from Joe from Texas. He wants to know, what are some ways that others, and specifically you right now, have successfully connected and engaged their pre and kindergarten and second grade families through the visual arts? That's sometimes the best time to get them because parents are most interested in their children starting school. So what do you do?
Well, this is going to feel like kind of a shameless self-plug, but I've partnered with our local PBS station to develop a digital drawing series called Drawing with Mr. J. It's completely free, but the focus of it is on talking to kids about their emotions, their experiences, while engaging them in these really quirky drawing prompts. And it's something that families can do at home. It doesn't require expensive materials. It's just something to draw with and something to draw on. And I hope that families do it together. And I know that families do it together from things that I've heard, because then it's not like, oh, I can't draw. Instead, it's like, okay, well, let's draw together, a fruit dance party or something like that. But it's great for kids of all ages, but especially this age that they're talking about from Texas of pre-K through 2. It'd be a great conversation starter and a way to encourage art making at home.
Also to get the hook into parents so they'll stay engaged with their child's learning as they go through the grades.
And the
Echo
whole is to
from
have
Tennessee has
Oh.
a question. I'm sorry.
No, you're good. Go ahead.
How do artists and art educators prepare? How do we prepare ourselves in this area of online learning? I know lots of people have questions about it. How do we make the most in terms of our impact teaching online?
Well, I was just talking to a friend today whose school went all digital, and he admitted, he's like, wow, that first class, I was so rusty. He's like, I did this before, but I forgot. And I think that's part of it, is like thinking back to these experiences when we jumped into this maybe last year or the year before, and what did we have to do to be prepared? One of those preparations is talking to kids about where to find your resources, where to find you. Making sure that they know if it's part of Schoology or Google Classroom, like where do they find that? And we can't just wait until we're all at home. You have to do those things in the classroom, not to scare them or to scare yourself, but to prepare them. Maybe it's a resource that you use not just during digital times, but throughout all of your art making. The other thing is not to make it so complicated, right? I just shared drawing with Mr. J. A lot of families and a lot of art teachers were using that when the pandemic just started, which was amazing to offer that resource, but like not to make it so hard that it's all about maybe a completed finished work, but it's about learning and creativity instead of like this beautiful masterwork that comes out of it.
Okay, we can't leave you, Jonathan, without asking you the all-important question. What do you do for self-care?
Well, I think that I don't focus much on the phrase self-care because of the connotations of like, you know, pedicures or like something like that. More I focus on this idea of self-regulation. How do I regulate myself in the moment? Especially being in a classroom. Do I hide my phone in a cabinet so that I'm not tempted to look at it in the middle of teaching with kindergartners? That's a method of self-regulation so that I'm focused on the people in the room. Is it about taking time on the car ride home to process things that had happened that day instead of listening to music or to NPR? Or to take some time to take a breath in the corner. My kiln room right here. Sometimes I need to step in there for a minute and take a beat, right? It's about finding those things in the moment that can help us process our feelings and our emotions.
That's a great idea, just being in the moment.
And something you and I had talked about before, Sarah, is that sometimes it's about regulating by not taking on too many activities, right? Knowing when to say, no, thank you. But this person might be interested.
Right. And that's hard for us. So particularly, I'm looking at this group on screen right now. I'm sure every one of us has taken on sometimes too much, and we need to be able to say no when it's important for our own well-being. Jonathan, thank you for your time. And I'm going to move on and give you an opportunity to move on.
Thank you, Sarah. All right, so I am excited to introduce Candido Crespo, who's the art teacher at Central Islip Union Free School District in Central Islip, New York. Welcome.
What's up, Jonathan? Hello, everyone. I'm so glad to be here today.
I'm excited to see you and to get to these questions.
Sure.
So the first one comes from Daniel from Oregon, and he asks, how do you demonstrate these qualities of community vibrancy by representation of diversity in teachers, administration, etc.?
Right. So, first of all, I'm super excited about this question because it's something I'm very passionate about, especially right now as I've moved along in the career, just acknowledging some other things. But first, I'll start with just like a statement of privilege. When it comes to connecting with my community, I already have an existing upper hand. I speak the language of all my students. I've grown up in the community next to them, but I don't take it for granted. So that's super important, right? Just because I have that ability doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be you know, a walk in the park connecting with my students. I still need to pull my fair share of the weight in connecting with them. But let's get a little bit more technical. So I live on Long Island. I teach on Long Island. And recently our Long Island Latino Teachers Association they reached out to our local officials and asking them to take a look at what our demographics are as far as teachers go. And they found that only 8% of the teachers were people of color compared to 45% of our students who are students of color. And, when we're thinking of community vibrancy, that doesn't really align. Those statistics don't fall in line with what we're expecting to do. And then I thought about it a little bit more and expanding and working with what we have, because we're resourceful, we're creative people, we're art teachers is what we do. So I think that I don't think that you need to physically represent the community to be a part of it, right? So I'm thinking of something as simple as, hey, I know everybody loves their Starbucks and Dunkin' Donuts, but if you go to the local convenience store and bodega to get your coffee, you can be building connections that you may not even know that that you could have done all along. Something simple to be aware of. Now, that doesn't excuse the lack of representation in the actual employment. I mean, that's something that districts need to take a hard look at. So yeah.
Thank you. I mean, actionable steps right there.
Right.
Thank you. All right. So Miriam from Virginia has our next question. And she asks, how are we supporting teachers to follow the latest findings about creativity and innovation?
Right. So I'm a social media guy. I won't pull any punches. And actually, Jonathan, you mentioned something earlier in your conversation about what it's like to just reach out to somebody and compliment them on what they do. I've done that with you. That's something that you and I have done. Yeah. And I pride myself on that because it's so exciting to be able to meet like-minded people and take advantage of these tools that we have our access. So when we're thinking about like, hey, how, innovations in technology, we had to do this. This is something that we just had to do in the past 2 years. We had to rely on each other. We had to reach out to each other and say like, hey, I just went virtual, but I've never done virtual before. And there's nothing like reaching out to somebody who is already in your position and asking them for assistance and having them walk you through this experience and holding each other's hands through the process. I also want to encourage teachers to step out of the field, right? It's one thing to rely on other art teachers to gain this information, but there's something special about going into other fields and networking with other professions and learning from them as well to find out how we could bring that information into our classrooms. I think people who are like second career teachers, I think they always have an upper hand in the classroom because they've had an opportunity to build and network outside of the classroom as well.
Yes. Okay. So you've been building a relationship with NAEA's ED&I, so many letters right there. What strategies are you learning that are effective for honoring diversity and building community from the classroom out?
So first thing I want to do is I want to commend the existing ED&I commission and everybody who put in the work beforehand to form the committee. I think they're doing an incredible job, and I'm so excited to see what the future holds. What I've learned from being part of this committee, and I've had the privilege of working with Kendall with this, is really just a lot of self-reflection, spending time not only learning, right? So peer-to-peer interactions, reading text, watching presentations, participating in presentations, but really this self-reflection that leads to unlearning, right? Because I will never excuse myself of not being the best teacher when it comes to ED&I practices inside the classroom. I've had my mess ups, my screw ups in the classroom, and I'm constantly learning and unlearning at the same time. So it's been a privilege just being around people who have done the same thing, have really taken the time that's necessary to acknowledge, where they can improve. And it's really a celebration, like, hey, let's move past this thing, learning about appropriation, learning about, appreciation and those types of changes. So for me, it's just really like, I guess it goes back to the first question, not really just relying on what I represent, but instead, I guess taking advantage of the power, really falling into it and understanding like, hey, I represent much more than not.
So last question, what
Sure.
are your tips for self-care?
So I'm kind of a simple guy with this, and I'm just a beer and a sketchbook type of person. That's my happy place. After a long day, just sit down, cold one, little sketch session, and I'll be all right.
And I'm sure a lot of people can relate to that on this call. Thank you. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you, Jonathan. All right, my turn. And this is a privilege because I've had the opportunity to work with her for quite some time now, and we continue to build a relationship. And I can't wait till you hear some of her incredible knowledge. I would like to introduce you all to Kendall Boyd. She is the FAO Schwartz Fellow for Community Engagement and Family Programs at the Barnes Foundation in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. Kendall, how are you?
Hi, Candido. So always great to fellowship and to converse with you and share space with you.
Yeah, likewise. So we have some questions here. Let's jump into them, right?
All right.
Brett from Wisconsin wants to know, what are effective ways to build trust and connection between larger institutions and individual communities and neighborhoods?
Yes, so definitely in the work that I do, and first of all, I'm coming from a space where I'm not a classroom teacher. I'm working in a museum, for those of you who are not familiar with the Barnes Foundation. I'm working in a museum and doing programming that's outside of the institution. And so we're always connecting with our communities that are surrounding us in the greater Philadelphia community. And so we always strive our best to learn about the communities that are surrounding us, right? The ones that are closest to us, but also the ones that are further from us, learning about them, what is important to these communities, what's going on in their neighborhoods. And the way that we can learn about them is doing research about them. Are we reading the news? Are we really truly knowing what's going on outside of the institution walls? Do we know what's going on around us? And keeping ourselves apprised of that, so that we are connected. Many people who work in museums or different institutions oftentimes don't even live in the city or in the neighborhood. So it's really important to stay in tune. I mean, that same thing can very much apply to our educators who are working in schools, right? So staying connected to the communities that surround you is very important. But also meeting them where they are. So if you are striving to create connections and relationships with communities that are surrounding you, are we connecting with truly connecting with those people? So are we meeting with community leaders? Are we meeting with other organizations that are already existing in these neighborhoods and communities that are already doing the work for their communities and serving their communities? Are we connecting with them, finding out what their needs are, what their interests are, what the needs of their communities are, so that we could be able to work together and build relationship with them. And it's really important, especially because of accessibility, again, to the institution. So oftentimes in community engagement and family programs, or CEF, because that's a mouthful, we're doing work in South Philly and in West Philly. And right now we're really trying best to find different community organizations to connect to in North Philly. We had a high school group come down in the summer and had a focus group with them. And many of the students said that they live so far away from Center City that it's not really accessible for them to have access to. So how can we reach them? So thinking about those ways that we can reach them and bring programming to their areas and collaborate with community organizations that they're already a part of, that they're already being serviced by. Yeah.
All right.
That's really it.
All right. So Emily in Seattle asked, why is arts education so vital for the growth and development of community at all levels?
This is such a big one, and I spent a lot of time this weekend thinking about this question. I think the direction I really want to go with this is unifying. I think that arts education, whether it's happening in the school, whether it's happening at community, at community level, through programming, through different work at organizations, I think, well, first and foremost, every community, every culture, every people has their own. Art is intrinsic to us as human beings. That's something I always come back to. It's something that distinguishes us from any other species on this planet. And so going into doing work in communities, it's always being aware that these communities already have their own arts and culture scenes. They're doing it already. They're doing this, they're creating. It's something that we're always going to do. But what's so beautiful for me about the work that I get to do is being able to connect, and for me to go into schools in West Philadelphia and where they don't have an art class, and teach them about some of the artwork that's at the Barnes Foundation, and teach them about some of those artists, teaching them some art making skills, giving them some language, while they, of course, again, they are creating, especially as young kids are already creating, they already have their own culture, artwork that they admire, that they enjoy. I think the expansion for everyone, expansion of that knowledge just builds upon our palettes. It makes us so much more aware of what's going around us in our world. And that goes for anyone on any side of the spectrum, any corner of the world. Being able to connect to other human beings through art, to me, is such a really special thing.
Right. Okay. What's one thing you'd like to see happen for NAEA that would strengthen our community moving forward, and why?
I think I'd really like to see, and sometimes, I'm speaking for myself as well. Sometimes when I'm at a PAEA or NAEA event, I feel like a black sheep because I'm not a classroom teacher. And while there are museum educators and some, they're like, oh, hey, shout out museum educators, there's everyone else is a classroom teacher, and that's great. I have some of that experience as well, and I love classroom teachers. That's why I'm in the field that I am in right now. But I think I would love to see more spaces for non-traditional art educators, educators who are working in their community, art teaching artists, those who are working and creating their own art education programs for the children in their community. I would like to see them welcomed into the fold and providing resources and sharing the wealth of resources that you and Jonathan were kind of touching on before, being able to share those resources and connecting with those non-traditional teaching artists and art educators. We all need each other. There's so much that some of us are trained art educators like myself, and the rest of us can learn from them, and they can learn from us. And I think that would really make a vibrant art education community.
Right on. All right, Kendall, give us some tips of self-care.
This is a big one for me. I listen, I might be an expert on this. Setting healthy boundaries. And I think that can be hard for some people, but one of my favorite things, and sometimes I laugh at myself about this because it's like I'm a no buts about it. I don't get Outlook, Microsoft notifications after 5 p.m. I don't get them on weekends. I don't get them. I don't look at it. I leave work for my work hours. And I also, especially this year, I'm trying to really push myself forward to really expanding on the maximum possible joy that I can have and experience in abundance by pursuing some of my other passions and interests. While the work that I do is certainly one of my passions, being able to do the other things that I really enjoy, and for me, that's really nutrition and food and holistic wellness, and finding time for myself to pursue those interests as well. Sarah earlier was talking about balance, is kind of balance in a different way, being able to balance your passions. Finding a way to do that really, I think, contributes to my overall wellness and my ability to be vibrant and to show up and be vibrant.
All right. Thank you, Kendall.
Thank you, Candida. All right, so we're turning it back over to Mario. Welcome back.
Hey, thanks.
We've been having a great conversation. I've really been enjoying this conversation. And I'm wondering, what are you hearing as trends and takeaways from tonight's conversation?
Yeah, absolutely. At this 14th town hall, I realized I have 14 pages of notes that I should probably turn into some small volume of great tips and tricks and recommendations. And tonight is also providing a lot of great ideas. So get ready for my full list. So finding common ground, starting small, focusing on leadership. And then I had this learn and listen and balance piece. So Sarah, thank you for all those takeaways. And then from Jonathan, connection, empowerment, self-regulation, which I've highlighted and underscored because it's a good reminder. And also this piece about being in the moment. And then Candido, finding connections to your community, reflecting our student populations in so many ways, reaching out and relying upon others, right? Especially now, but I think that's been exaggerated in a good way. We really need each other. Borrowing from other fields, what a fun idea. And then of course, beer and a sketchbook. Future town hall topic, beer and a sketchbook. I think you and I can collaborate on that. And then Kendall, researching our communities and also reaching our communities. And this arts ed is unifying, just a lovely statement from you. And then really working to welcome in non-traditional communities. And I'm so glad to hear you call that out loud and call us in, because that's one of the areas in our recent strategic plan that we named, was really like broadening our definition and understanding of who is an art educator and making sure we're welcome everybody in to the community. So I really appreciate that. All right, Kendall, what's next here?
Sorry, I was reading comments as I was listening to you. I'm just this conversation. A lot of the things that our folks in the chat have been saying, I think have also been really contributing to the conversation. What advice would you give to our educators right now?
While I work on that, if you want to call out anything from the chat in a minute, feel free to do that. You know, one piece of advice I always give at every one of these town halls is not to put yourself last. It's not selfish to make sure that you're doing okay, right? You know, those phrases like you can't pour from an empty cup, but it's like, how do we fill our cups? So I think that's part of why we focus on the self-care part of the conversation every time. The other advice I might give that's a little bit different, that I think about all the time, but I don't always give at the town halls, is just, you know, reach out of your comfort zone and connect with a colleague or multiple colleagues, because so many of us found that connection because someone reached out to us and welcomed us in, whatever that might be. And I know that, you know, I can remember being in my elementary classroom and another teacher, we were sort of split and traveled between multiple buildings. And when I got the news that someone was going to share my space, look, I got to say, I wasn't excited about that. I wasn't a good sharer back in the day, but it was the best thing that could happen to me, because she welcomed me into the profession in a way that I didn't know the pathway to get there. And I was like, oh, look, there are other people like me and they're like-minded folks, and I can get ideas and share ideas and we can get really jazzed about it. So anyways, I think my advice would be like, reach out to others, because we still really need each other. So, and I think we heard that throughout this evening as well.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So the question that everyone has been asked tonight, what are your tips for self-care?
Yes, I try to change this up each time. So I'm really focusing on less delivery and more making meals at home. So I bought a couple new cookbooks, and I'm proud to report that there have been many dinners made in my kitchen lately, which is great.
Yum.
And then I love TV, I have to say. And so I'm really excited about the new Boba Fett Star Wars series on Disney Plus. It's pretty good. The last episode was a little bit weird, but I'm really loving it overall. And then if you haven't seen Station 11, really interesting. It's kind of a post-pandemic kind of view, but one that actually has some hope and interesting takes in it. So I would recommend that. Yeah.
Great. Well, thank you so much for sharing with us, and thank you for inviting us all to share space and converse with one another, Mario.
It's been a joy. Thank you so much, Kendall. So we are moving sometimes we move really quickly. So we do have some time for a few additional questions for our guests. So I'm just checking the chat. If anyone has something, feel free to put it in the chat. I do have a couple questions I wanted to follow up with you all on. So, you know, we had this idea of community vibrancy, and I think we've heard to our members' questions and participants' questions and to the big picture, but I'm just curious, like, is there a specific moment or even a specific approach that you might have to building community within your classroom or your workspace? So Candido, I'm going to pick on you first. Is there a specific strategy that you use to build community within your classroom?
So within the classroom, it's really it's really something I've come to learn, the whole student voice and student-centered classroom, right? Giving everybody an opportunity to feel like they exist in that space. But I would say that I'm better at I'm better at understanding, like bringing them into the community or bringing the community into the classroom. I probably have a stronger grasp on that. And so my view is pretty grand in the idea that the way I see my classroom is just a studio space, right? And then the community is our gallery. And so like everything that takes place inside of the classroom is really just students learning techniques, learning methods, or producing work in an attempt to then color the community. And so, that may be through murals, that may be through exhibitions in banks or, open spaces that are available. And that's something that's ongoing for me and something that I'm really trying to grasp and build on. So it would be those two things, giving a student-centered voice in the classroom so that they feel like there exists, and then finding ways to really, really make the community an aspect of learning.
I love that. It makes me think when I was a administrator and visiting art classrooms, my favorite thing to do would be to ask, talk to the students and ask them to explain what they're learning and their approach. And it'd be fascinating, like students get at a much deeper level than we ever realize, but we rarely get the chance to ask individual students, like, why are you learning about this? Like, how does this connect to your life? And I love those conversations. Sarah, if I can pick on you, because you have a lot of experience working with large groups and populations and adult learners, is there maybe a strategy you could share about how you build community among adult learners? Because adults are not the same beast as young students in your classroom. Oh, you're muted, my friend.
I thought you were all here in my living room. I particularly rely on my last experience with the Arts Education Collaborative. Many of us appear to not be isolated when we are. I was glad to hear Kendall referring to teaching artists and arts and culture organizations. We certainly worked very hard to build alliances with 67 school districts in Western Pennsylvania. But in addition to that, we built relationships, deep relationships with over 60 arts and culture organizations. And that included museums, neighborhood-centered small shops, Carnegie Museum of Art, big shops. And I think that idea of what would it take for us to act as one rather than many independent voices had a major emphasis in our work, but it also had a big bang for the buck. We were able to do things that we never could do ourselves. Ken Robinson talked about when we brought him to Pittsburgh, bless his heart, he said, it's a big job we have to do. The problem is you can't do it all at one time. You have to carve out your piece and work from where you are. So if you're a classroom teacher, you work from there. If you're a museum educator, if you're a teaching artist, you work from where you are and build out. And I was lucky enough to have that classroom experience, but I was also very fortunate in running a school and being able to have multiple disciplines working together, which we, in my opinion, need to do much more of. So that's what I'm thinking.
Kendall, I'm going to go to you for this one because I love that you each have such a range of experiences, some overlapping, but by working at a museum, you're working on a visitor basis. I imagine there's some relationships that continue. How do you build community when folks are sort of, maybe visiting and you're not seeing them every day? It's a little bit of a different setup. How does that work?
Yeah, it's very different. It's, for example, CEF, again, that's my department, Community Engagement and Family Programs. Every first Sunday of the month, we hold free First Sundays. And that's, museum-wide. Anyone signing up can get free admission to the museum's permanent collection and a special exhibition. Public programs has some fabulous local musicians or artists or performance groups come, and then my team hosts some sort of art making activity. So that's one of my favorite times because I can see kids and work with kids. But like you said, sometimes these families and people are drop-ins. Sometimes they're coming in from New York and they're only here for a day. And I think it's hard, but I think I sometimes love to think about how the moment, the community that I'm creating in the moment, I love still being able to connect with humans and little ones, and having fun with them and seeing them have fun making art and looking at art and making connections. And when they do our scavenger hunt, they come back and they're so excited about what they found and how they found it and what they didn't find. I think really sometimes emphasizing that feeling in the moment, making them feel welcome. That's how that's how we kind of create community in those moments. If we can't worry about longevity, we're still welcoming them into our space.
I love that idea of those creative moments, right? Where there's a spark, there's something unique that happens, right? Through art making or engaging with something that really inspires you. And I remember when I was, let's just say a few years ago, maybe at the early part of my career, when I worked at the Andy Warhol Museum, I was an artist educator, and we had something called the Weekend Factory, where it was a drop-in studio for visitors. And I'll tell you what, I learned more about how to systematize my materials and teaching and methods from that experience, but also to design for that spark, right? Whereas, because it's like, this is your one moment to grab these folks and you may not see them again. And oftentimes we did see them again, and they often would come to the studio more than the museum sometimes. But I remember seeing that spark. Jonathan, I'm going to jump to you with a question from Sally in the chat. What is a positive that you've seen come out of the past year-ish, maybe specifically as it relates to community? If we can put you on the spot for that one.
Yeah. And this is something I've been thinking a lot about recently, is that the phrase toxic positivity comes up a lot. And I have had conversations where I've almost been villainized because I have a positive outlook on life. Yes, I get angry. Yes, I get grumpy. Yes, I get defeated, but I have a positive outlook on life. It's who I am. And I think that we have to find those people, right? Find those positive people to spend time with. So that's me. But I think one of the things that came out of the pandemic is that I want to talk about adult social emotional learning for a minute in my school. And we felt very isolated last year. We were in our rooms, but that's where we stayed. We weren't making connections. And so I and a colleague decided that we were going to celebrate every staff member's birthday this year.
Oh, wow.
And their half birthdays, because there's those sweet people in July that never get celebrated. So we bought an electric balloon pump, and every morning of someone's birthday or the Monday afterwards, we have a arch of balloons over their door. And it's something so simple and goofy that brings together community. Then all of the kids know it's that person's birthday or half birthday, and they're all saying happy birthday to this person that maybe they don't get to engage with very much, but it's building this sense of community. And then just to walk through the halls, not only is there artwork everywhere, but there's also balloons. And so some of them have been up for quite a while, so they're looking a little rough. But I mean, it's joy and it's positive, and it's a way that we're building community with adults, but then also for kids to celebrate their birthdays along with them. There's a new teacher at our building who's a veteran teacher, who said, no one has ever celebrated my birthday before. And I was like, well, welcome to our school. Don't know if I can keep this up next year, but for this year, it's great.
Sarah, looks like you're going to jump in there.
Yeah, I just wanted to say, and it's coming up in the chat too, just having fun, the spirit of having fun. And you just emphasized that, Jonathan. When I became a principal, I think that I became crucially aware that school wasn't fun. My classroom was fun when I was an art teacher, I thought, but the school wasn't fun. I did a silly thing that worked. I had known colleagues for a very long time when I became principal. I made oatmeal raisin cookies and took pictures of milk to the first faculty meeting. Now that sounds crazy and goofy. I had to take them for every meeting after that. People talked about it. They talked over the cookies and milk. So often we would leave those kinds of social silly moments to the end of the meeting when you don't have time. Everybody's ready to go on to their next thing. So we started doing it at the beginning of the meeting, and people had so much fun with it. They said, you know what we need? We need a caring committee in this school. And they started, not with my leadership, they started a caring committee. So any baby that was born, birthday that was celebrated, tooth that fell out in their child. I mean, it got crazy, but it was so much fun. Anyhow, fun.
You got to have that joy. I know, I feel like we could start to design a school that is based off of this joy. It's like, I've got my cookies and milk, I've got the balloon arch. I think there's some music that's coming in. Like, my sister has been a veteran. She's probably taught middle school for, I don't know, 29 years. And she just became an AP at a high school in Cleveland. And she not only loves it, but she said it's the first time that she's got a celebration for her birthday that's sort of loud enough that she hears it. Like, she really, in a way that she appreciated it. And I think it involved the marching band at the school doing a serenade. But like, it really makes a difference for folks, right? Not to forget about that stuff, not to sweep it under the rug. I have some closing business to do, but if any of our guests are able to answer any other questions in the chat, I saw, Kendall, there was one specifically for you, so maybe you could answer it within the chat, because I want to make sure I honor everyone's time. So first of all, we thank all of our audience, our friends joining us this evening, prioritizing us in the early part of 2022. So Happy New Year to all of you. And I want to thank board members that have joined us in the audience. And of course, can we do a thunderous round of applause and a big shout out to Sarah and Jonathan and Candido and Kendall for sharing their wisdom and their expertise and their joy with us. So thank you very much, all four of you. As we begin to wrap up, please hang on. I have a few slides to go through, some things that are relevant to this conversation. You can see right now on the screen. We always have a handy dandy handout from our conversations. This is representing our guest thinking that you heard tonight, plus some other ideas. So you can scan this QR code or go to the Town Hall website and download any of the handouts and see any of the recorded videos at artseducators.org. Thank you. And if you found community and connection and joy this evening, please consider becoming a member and joining us. We know for our town halls, about half of our audience are non-members, and we just say, hey, we're broadening that umbrella, we're extending the invitation. And if you found that connection, there's lots more of it and a lot more of us in this community. We're very excited that we are continuing our plans for all three versions of our national convention for 2022. So March 3 to 5, you can go safely in person to New York City. We do need vaccination for everyone. That's a requirement for New York State. You need to have proof of being fully vaccinated, but we will have a really excellent in-person convention. We also have our hybrid convention, which is the mix of in-person, and it accesses our virtual, which is our third option. So you can engage online from the comfort of home or your office. There are a few extra special virtual only features I will mention, but I am really encouraging folks to vote with their feet and get that registration in, because it really helps us to plan the most successful experiences for you, no matter which option you go with. But we're really excited. We have Hank Willis Thomas and Vanessa German, for example, are two of our keynotes, plus hundreds of member-led sessions across all ages, grades, and museums, cultural institutions, scholars, researchers, pre-K to 12, college, university, everybody. We're all there. So hope to see you. And upcoming webinar, Connecting with English Language Learners in the Visual Arts Classroom on February 2nd. And our webcast is Visual Journaling, a Self-Study. So great options coming up. and our National Art Honor Society. We're so glad that we've seen this group of students grow, especially this past year. The chapter handbook has everything that you need to know about it, but please considering starting a chapter. It's easy, you know, you're a member, we have a middle school and high school version essentially, and high schoolers can get their cords and tassels and proudly march down with that arts signifier at graduation. And we also have some very special opportunities that we're working on for Honor Society, which I think is maybe the next slide. Oh, not yet. We just opened our 22 exhibit for the National Art and Junior Art Honor Society. So we're throwing in more submissions than ever. Apparently a lot in the drawing category, might have something to do with virtual instruction, but we're really excited for you to see these student works. So please visit. You can see the QR code and the link right there. Please look at the student work. It's just gorgeous and really inspiring. And we can't say the names. We do want to do a shout out and congratulations to the 20 semifinalists for the Herschel Workshop Challenge. They're designing backpacks, the backpack of the future. So we had many submissions, hard to get it down to 20. They're in a virtual design workshop right now in January, and then 2 will be chosen for $10,000 scholarships apiece, and a trip to Herschel's headquarters in Vancouver, and hopefully come to convention in New York to see us. So really exciting opportunities to promote that art and design career pathway. Okay, I think we're wrapping it up. There we go. Thank you everyone for joining us. Stay safe.